Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We're going to get started in just a minute. I'm Nicole Purcell from the marketing department. I'm really excited that you guys have set aside some time to learn more about identifying garage hazards. We're really excited about this webinar. It's unique. We've done things a bit differently. I just want to go through a couple house rules before we start. This is live. It's interactive. Your microphones are turned on. You have the ability to mute yourself if there's background noise going on around you. If you need to cough or sneeze, you can mute yourself. This webinar contains video, slide information, and of course, our garage underwriting experts, Ryan and Annie. We want you to be participating. So you can interrupt us throughout the webinar and ask questions. We will have a designated question and answer session at the end as well. If you're not comfortable shouting out, there is a question box feature in your control panel on the right-hand side. You can type a question in the box, and the underwriters will answer your question. This contains a copy of the PowerPoint presentation in the email we're going to be sending out at the end today. We're also going to be recording the webinar as well, so you can have that and share that with folks in your office. In addition, there will be a survey at the very, very end. If you could please complete that, that helps us to know how we're doing and what you'd like to learn about next. Now, I'm going to turn control over to our garage experts, Ryan Moore and Annie Miller.
Thank you, Nicole. And as she mentioned, my name is Ryan Moore. I am one of the garage team underwriters here at the Toscano Agency. And I wanted to welcome you all to our second garage webinar. I think you're really going to like what we have to show you today. And I want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to join us. If you missed the first garage webinar, I'll give you a brief history of myself. I have a motorsports type background, pretty much been building racing cars ever since I had a driver's license. I also own my own repair garage and shop. I did work in the retail insurance arena for a little while, and I focused on commercial lines, especially garages. And now I work here at the Toscano Agency on the wholesale end. So I pretty much had experience in every part and piece that you could think of pertaining to a garage. I'm also joined by Annie Miller, our senior garage team underwriter. Annie, would you like to give a shout out to all the folks who are joining us today?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, you can't see me, but I am here. So willing to talk to you. If you need something, please don't hesitate to ask questions. We're here to answer them. No question is dumb. And have a good time.
All right, so let's take a look at the overview of what we're going to be talking about and watching today. What we really want to do is take you to a garage. When you pull up in front of this garage, we want to look at some of the exterior exposures. We want to get you inside the garage, see what really goes on in these type of operations, and just make you aware of some of the hazards in this type of a business. And then we want to get you back out and show you some garage keepers coverage items. Things that come up during an inspection, after you might bind a policy, and again, just the overall garage operation as a whole. Please feel free to ask questions, and I will stop and ask for questions after each one of the slides. But if there's something that you see in the video or on the slide, or if there's an experience that you've had at a garage previously, feel free to bring it up either after the slide or at the end of the presentation. We'd be more than happy to field that question for you. Let's talk a little bit for a sec about who we are, who is Toscano, who is our agency. We are a family-owned business of about 100 employees, started in 1970, and we have a big focus on customer service and our agents and agencies. We provide support and education to our agents like we're doing now, and we provide solutions for all of your hard-to-place business. So give us a call. For anything that's really unique that you're having a tough time with. And we do have some new companies, in our wheelhouse that are competing a little more on the lines of your standard markets. So give us a call. We'd love to talk with you about, some of the opportunities that you're currently prospecting. All right, so to kick this off, we're going to start with number one. It's exterior. We're going to look at the exterior of the building and some of the things you need to look for when you pull up on site at a garage.
Hello, this is Ryan Moore,
garage underwriter from the Toscano Agency, and as promised, we are on site in a garage here in Western Pennsylvania. And we're going to take a look at a few things outside and then get you inside to see some of the exposures that we discussed, the type exposures of a garage. And first off, we pulled up in front, and we want to make you aware of some of the things when you pull up to any garage in any state or any town that you're in. Not only are you going to be looking at your standard property type questions and issues, sidewalks, how do they look, windows, doors, locks, overall appearance, lighting. As you're looking at those items on a building like you would for any type of property that you're taking a look at and that you're going to write, you also want to look at this particular business for say, and you're going to notice parking. There's no parking lot here. So a question that you might come up with when you pull up into a garage like this is, are they parking customer cars on the street instead of in a parking lot or inside the building? That might be a question you're going to want to ask. You can also smell, as we pull up here, wood burning. Do they have a pellet stove, or do they have some sort of wood burning furnace inside? That's going to be another question that you're going to want to talk about, and we'll get into that a little more in depth when we move inside. But first and foremost, you want to do your standard property underwriting. Windows, doors, overall appearance of the building. If you can see the roof, how does it look? Again, the lighting, and just do your overall inspection on the outside of the building. You might also want to take note of vehicles parked either on the premise or on the streets that you can discuss. Some garage keepers coverage and maybe how many cars they have on the lot when you get inside. Okay, so as I had mentioned in the video, you want to do your general property underwriting when you pull up in front of any of these buildings. But you also want to pay attention to things, as I mentioned, street parking, parking lots, what is the condition of the parking lot, the sidewalks, how do they look? If you notice here in the bottom right-hand corner, the picture on the slide, what you didn't see in the video was a flatbed tow truck that's parked there. That's going to spark a question about whether or not they tow for just their customer base or if they are potentially a tow for hire operation. They might also have some floater tags involved with that towing operation or with the garage in general. So you just want to be aware. You want to look at parking spaces. You want to do your general property underwriting on the exterior of the building. And if you see, a tow truck or something of that nature, you want to ask some questions about it, which might lead into, additional tags and things. Central station alarm, that's something else that comes up constantly for us. Look around on the exterior, see if it's available. And again, when you get into the building, you can validate whether or not they have any type of alarm system on the property. Are there any questions that you guys have right now on things that we just saw in the video or on the slide for the exterior of the building? All right. There's no questions on the exterior, and again, we can circle back around later. Let's move on to garage keepers. As we've talked already, you're looking for vehicles parked on the street. If they are parking vehicles on the street, you're looking for vehicles inside of the building, about how many and what you think the average cost is, as well as talking with the insured. You're also going to look at any fenced-in lots or parking areas that they have to get a real good gauge on how many vehicles they have on their premise at one given time, and then factor in how much these vehicles cost to replace on average. So that'll help you determine what the real number might be for your garage keepers coverage, along with what the insured is telling you he would like his garage keepers coverage to be. And then you guys can work out a happy medium to ensure that the business owner is properly covered for the exposure that he has. Okay, so as I mentioned there, total spots, both parking on the street, also parking in the lot, total spots available inside the building. You want to make note of that. You want to look around at the vehicles that are on the premise. I mean, if they're working on 3-year-old Mercedes-Benz compared to 10-year-old Subarus, obviously the cost to replace a 3-year-old Mercedes is going to be drastically different than a 10-year-old Subaru. So you can at least walk in the door and have a pretty good idea of, hey, there's 30 spaces here and the cars look to be valued at, X amount. you can kind of put a number together in your head for the garage keepers already, and then you can work with the insured to get the proper number squared away if in fact they are going to have garage keepers coverage. Another thing that is a good indicator of how many vehicles they have, which you might not even see. In the picture here, you see a lockbox with keys. Not only is that a good practice to secure keys when no one's on site after hours, but if they say, hey, we only have 10 vehicles on site at any one given time, and you count 20 keys, that's going to start to ask some other questions and really get down to where the other vehicles are and what the real number is going to be for the garage keepers coverage. Any questions on what we saw in the video on the slide pertaining to garage keepers? All right, let's go into the building now, and let's talk a little bit about the interior and what you need to look for.
Okay, now we are inside the garage. We came in, we spoke with the business owner. And what you want to do when you first come into a garage like this is you want to look around, you want to look at the overall housekeeping. You want to get a good gauge of where equipment's stored, where bottles and cans sitting out of, solvents and cleaning supplies and things like that, and just get a good lay of the land. You're obviously going to look at your plumbing if you can, your electrical panel box. You want to make sure, just like looking at any property, there's breakers if possible, and any of the open slots in the breakers in the panel box are filled. You want to look at the key storage. They have a lockbox for the keys. You also want to look for smoke detectors and fire extinguishers, like you're going to see on the wall later on. But you want to get a good lay of the land, get what's going on in the garage, get a good feel for it. And something else you want to look for, because most shops in all states, especially Western Pennsylvania, they do have shop dogs. So you want to take a look and see if there's any animals on the premise, or at least ask the question if you see a water bowl or something like that sitting around.
So when you're walking in the door and when you're finally able to get into the service and work area of the building, again, you want to look around, you want to get a really good feel for the housekeeping, of the operation and how it looks. Again, your general property underwriting is always a good thing to do. How old is the HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and even the roof? And as you can see here on the left-hand side of the slide, there's a really great example of what a panel box should look like. In front of it, it was uncluttered. There was plenty of room to get to the box, and then any of the slots below the active breakers are filled, obviously, to reduce any type of electrical hazard or issue. If someone were working on the box, you don't want them to get shocked. Smoke detectors, you should see those in all these locations as well. As we mentioned in the previous slide, you have the key lock box in the top right to help reduce theft or any other issues after hours where someone has accessibility to the keys. The picture on the right hand side in the middle, that's a really great example of what if you will, a perfect shop should look like. As you see, the vehicles are in the right spots. If they're not in the bay to be worked on, they're back out of the way. Tools and equipment are on a rolling cart, or they're not a trip hazard for the person working on the vehicle. There's plenty of good lighting. The floors are clean. So that's a really great example of a garage. If you're going to walk in and you see something like that, that says a lot about typically the business, the owner, and the operation as a whole. And as I mentioned, shop dogs, as you see here, there was a beagle on site at this particular garage that we went into. Really great dog, very mild-mannered, very nice. However, most of our markets don't differentiate on animals. They typically always have an exclusion in place for any incident that occurs because of an animal. They don't care if it's a 7-pound Maltese or a 100-pound Rottweiler. They're going to exclude coverage on something like that. But just be aware, a lot of shops, especially in Western PA, and I've been in a ton of them, most of them do have an animal, and it's a lot of times a pet, that'll come to work with an owner or possibly an employee that might be on site. The other thing when you're in the inside of these buildings, fire extinguishers, and we're going to see later on some of the fire and burn exposures that are, very apparent in a garage operation. You typically want, a bigger bottle, 7-pound or up. Sometimes there's 10, 20-pound bottles, depending upon, the township or the municipality. They're usually going to make a recommendation to the garage owner. And a lot of times they're going to carry an A, B, and C rating, which is going to put everything out from your typical, wood and, rags that might be on fire to petroleum-based fires that might occur from gasoline, or oil. But you just want to make sure that there are fire extinguishers available near the doorways or the exits, just in case, something happens in the shop. Any particular questions on the interior, what you see here on the slide, animals, fire extinguishers?
Ryan, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
I have a body shop insured that has in the past have brought in vehicles in the middle of the evening, in the middle of the night, I should say. And in one case, they brought in on a flatbed a vehicle that they parked it, and the driver went home, and the vehicle caught fire sitting on the flatbed and burned the building down. So, so one of the things to be aware of is where do they put their vehicles if they're towed in odd times of the day or night, and do they put them directly into the garage or do they leave them outside? Just a good point, because they don't know what's going on in the hood. So, also, is there a if there's multiple buildings, is there a minimum footage that they like to see between the buildings? Because I know some carriers have maximum property building values that they want to insure for, and if the buildings are separated, those maximums don't apply as much, but if they're close together, they do. What comment do you have on that, if any?
And maybe I'll have Annie chime in here a little bit too, but at least from the building inspections that I've seen after writing policies, in my experience so far, I haven't seen one where they've had a particular distance that they want a building separated. But Annie, do you have an experience where you've run into that before, where the buildings are close together, in a city or something like that, where they've made a recommendation?
No, I have not. Most of our companies don't. They're not worried about the distance between. It's the total insured value, because then eventually it gets out of our authority. But no, I've never seen that. As to your loss with the tow truck and the fire, what happened with the car? The car, how did it catch on fire? Did somebody set it, or?
No, apparently it had an electrical issue that must have been occurring under the hood, and so as it sat there in the garage unattended, middle of the night, it caught fire, and then it ignited the rest of the building and took out I think it was like 5 tow trucks with it. Were also parked in the garage, and it was very high. And now this occurred about 10 years ago. But it was a very high valued loss.
Yeah,
I know some of our carriers have, like some of the insureds have a drop box. Like if you have a special, you have a friend that has a garage, and you can't get your car there till now, they have a drop box where you can put your keys. So they usually park it in the lot somewhere. But as for that would have to be a claims thing, and I can't answer that question on, if there would be coverage or how it would, and whatever else they do. So, you have anything to interject, Brian?
No, the only thing I was going to say, obviously is a best practice by the garage. If anything comes in with an electrical issue, you disconnect the battery to remove all power from the system. But who knows? They might not have known what the problem was, of course, and could have been, truly, accidental.
Yeah, well, it certainly was. And I made that comment more as a recommendation to the other producers and brokers that are out there listening to this, that if, ask that question of their clients or prospects, and make the recommendation that if they do tow vehicles, that they do not leave them just tow them into the garage and leave them there overnight, unattended, or the battery's still connected or whatever. Bad things can happen.
That's a good point, and there's a real story to back it up. So
yes,
I appreciate it. Absolutely, thank you. If there's no other questions or comments, and that was a really great one. Speaking of fires, let's move on to heating sources.
What do you want to do? Okay, as we were talking outside the building, we noticed that there was a chimney and some smoke coming out. So that alerted us that there's either a pellet stove or a waste oil furnace in here, or even a wood burning furnace. And as you can see, in this particular garage, they have a wood burning furnace. And you're going to see three types primarily in a lot of these garages. You're going to have either gas, whether that's forced air, which is pretty rare in a garage. A lot of times you're going to see an overhead type furnace. Reservoir is one of the manufacturers that you're going to see in a lot of places. But you're going to have gas. You're also going to have waste oil. So they're going to take oils and fluids from the cars that they drain out. Instead of recycling those, they're actually going to put them into a furnace. Typically, they're going to have a big tank that waste oil is going to sit in. They accumulate it up until winter, and then they fire those heaters up. Or you're going to have a pellet stove or a wood burning furnace like you see here. And we're going to show you some examples of waste oil storage that you might typically see in a garage like this when they have a waste oil furnace.
All right, so as we saw in the video there, they had a wood burning furnace. Obviously, a best practice is to move the fuel source away from any of those furnaces. So, we would make a recommendation that the wood that's next to it that obviously could potentially catch on fire should be away from the furnace, as a best practice. But as you see here, left-hand side is the wood burner. At the very top on this particular slide is the waste oil furnace that I had mentioned. You see the waste oil furnace is up above, and the tank that supplies it, with that petroleum-based fluid is sitting directly below it. The bottom slide in the center is actually 55-gallon drums filled with that particular oil. So a lot of these garages will store that stuff up. It's worth its weight in gold to these guys in the middle of winter. And you might find, a lot of those drums around the shop and hopefully a safe and secure area. And on the bottom right is the overhead gas furnace. A lot of new construction, you're going to see those type furnaces in place instead of some of the others, but it really all depends, what they have and what they want to run. But these are primarily the three that you're going to see, in place in a lot of garages, especially as you get out away from some of the city. You're going to see some of the fire burning and also the waste oil. One thing you do want to pay attention to as well, and I've seen it before, the waste oil that's being stored, or even the wood or the pellets that might go into some of the other stove. I've been in garages before where they're actually doing welding and cutting and other services near those type of fluids and fuel sources. And you just, want to be aware of what's in those drums if they're going to be welding near that or cutting near that. So obviously minimize any risk of, a fire hazard in these particular garages. I mean, they have enough issues as it is for things to catch on fire. You don't need another one. But any particular questions on what we saw in the vid or any of the big three here on the slide?
Ryan, we have a question that came in.
Okay.
Can the heating source be installed by the business owner, or does it have to be professionally installed?
Okay, so if it is, new construction, new building, typically there's always going to be an inspection. Again, a best practice is that it should be installed by a licensed professional to go through that inspection. Now, if you get into a building that's older and maybe the operation has been around forever, I know for a fact that these guys will install their own equipment. So it might come up on an inspection after a policy is written that they're going to require, a licensed technician to come out and verify that whatever the business owner has installed is truly safe and up to the code that they have where their building's located. But new construction, it's not quite an issue. But your existing garages and areas, these guys definitely put their own equipment in. Actually, the waste oil furnace in that particular picture was installed by the business owner. So there's a good question and a good example that we're looking at right here. But that's typically what I've seen in my experience. Any other questions on the furnaces or type of heating source? All right, if we don't have any other questions that have come in or no one wants to add, let's move on to a big one, falling objects.
One of the biggest exposures in any garage is falling objects. And as you see here, the two sitting on the lift combined weigh about 7,000 pounds of potential falling objects. So when you go to a garage, whether they have what you see here, a 2-post lift, or if they have a drive-on 4-post rack, you want to be aware, you want to be a little bit, more cognizant of how these particular pieces of machinery work and what you need to look for. So on any of these lifts, the one main thing you want to really look for is the locks. Do they work? Ask the business owner. For example, this truck's up a little bit higher, the locks are set. As I hit the release, it brings the truck down and it physically locks it so it won't fall. So if the seal were to break in the hydraulic system, the truck would come down and stop on these locks. If there's no locks and there's a mechanic underneath and there's a failure, you have a 4,000-pound truck coming down on a person, and that's obviously going to be a bad situation. A lot of times on the list, you're going to see inspection stickers. If the companies like Benpack, which is a really great company, or any of the retailers that sell them, they come in a lot of times and they look at the locks, the cables, the hydraulics, and make sure everything's working as it should. Another thing you want to look at on these lists are the pads and a lot of times the extensions. Sometimes you're going to go into a garage and they might be missing these pieces. So you're going to see an arm that comes out and maybe a block of wood or something that's not as safe as it should be for the guys working on the car. So you want to look around, you want to ask some questions, you want to make sure that these pieces of equipment are good working order. Number one, the locks are working. And number two, make sure that the pads on the lifts are proper for what they're going to be doing. No blocks of wood, no homemade devices to hold the cars up. You want the extensions and the pads they come with. Some screw in, some don't. You want to make sure that they're all intact and they're all working as they should.
So, a 4,000-pound vehicle is obviously pretty scary to be standing under, but they do have up to roughly 30,000-pound 2-post lifts that you're going to see on heavy truck repair facilities. That's typically going to be like a single-wheel dump truck, something like that. But, the locks and the lift actually being installed properly and working properly is going to be a big deal. 4,000 pounds or 30,000 pounds, either way, it's a pretty scary situation for the guy working underneath of it. It's not working properly. Typically, your 2-post lift, it's going to go up to about 30,000 pounds. That's where it's going to be capped off for a heavy-duty 2-post lift. Your 4-post lift, you can see up to about a 60,000-pound lift, obviously for your heavy tractors, semi-trucks, fire trucks, things like that. So you have both. You have your 2-post and 4-post. I can't say that one's safer than the other. They both have their pros and cons, but they definitely have different weight carrying capacities. And as I mentioned in the video, the big thing is, the hydraulics in the lifts, and if there's inspection stickers on them to make sure that they are functioning properly for the guys working underneath of them. Some of the big names you're going to see when you walk into any garage, and just like everything, there's new products and new manufacturers coming out on the daily basis. But Benpack, you can see that in the picture here, as well as the garage we were in. Really great manufacturer. Rotary, Mohawk, Forward, and Challenger. Those are some of the big ones that I've purchased myself in the past. And, a lot of the garages in our area and nationwide are going to have, in their particular facility. Does anybody have any questions on how these things function, how they work, really what you need to look out for, inspections, things like that? Any questions or comments?
Ryan, we have a question that came in. How often do the lifts need to be inspected, and is there a sticker they should be looking for when they're out in the garage?
That is a really great question. So typically any of the facilities that will sell a lift, they come out to the garage, they're going to measure the concrete, they're going to do an installation, they're going to make sure that the locks release properly, that the hydraulics function properly, and the electrical. They don't hook the electrical up. You need a third-party company to come in and hook up the 220 power to these, but they will come out usually in a garage like this that's in the slide that works on what I would say 10,000 pound and under private passenger vehicles or even light trucks. They're typically going to do an annual inspection, and there should be an inspection sticker on that lift of who inspected it and when it was inspected. If you get into heavier items, medium heavy duty trucks or your ultra heavy duty trucks, you're definitely going to have, inspections that are going to be biannual or even quarterly. And it just really depends on not only the manufacturer recommendation for the lift, but also the retailer and the installer. They might really want to, come out sooner to make sure everything works and it's functioning properly. But again, ultimately, what you'd really want to see on every one of these lifts is an inspection sticker with a date of the last time it was inspected. Any other questions?
Okay,
or
Ryan,
comments?
Yep. We have another question that came in. What about garages with pits? Are these okay to insure?
Okay, and I'll rely on Annie as well in case she has some other, information. I believe we do have some markets that will write pits. A lot of your oil and lube operations work out of a pit instead of actually a 4-post or 2-post lift. I'm not sure any particular restrictions. And do you have anything on a pit that you could add from experience?
No, none of our carriers are particular about the pits. They just want to make sure, we would get an inspection to, like you said, about the concrete for the actual lifts to make sure the concrete's right, the steps are clean, because they're going to step down. Because there's a workman's comp there. If the guy's coming down and it's all slippery and greasy and wet or whatever, they just want to make sure the pits are all clean and the actual mechanic knows what he's doing when he pulls it into the pit, because we've had them where they have not pulled them into the pit the correct way and half the car went down into the pit. So, but yeah, there's no particular carrier that's they're not against the pits. They just, like I said, the inspection will tell us if anything needs to be done.
Ryan, can I add a couple things to that?
Sure.
This is Ed Schmidt.
Yes.
I've gone through a couple of the inspections of the pits, and I can tell you that they will want to see covers, pit covers. There are companies out there that make them. You just provide the measurements and we'll put pit covers on them. I know the oil change places all have them. Been through many of those. Yep. And or they will want a railing of some type just to keep people from tripping and falling into the pit. One other thing too, recently was the electrical lighting that was in the pits. The inspector that I was with did not like the way the electrical was wired. He wanted everything in conduit and so on. So they had to make a change there as well. And that's about it. And I have a question for you with regards to the inspection of the lifts. Is that a voluntary thing or is that a mandatory item by either or the manufacturer or the insurance carriers?
To my knowledge, even with my own previous business, it was not mandatory. It was recommended by the lift manufacturer and then also the company that came and did the installation for us that also sold us the piece of equipment. We did it on our end to make sure that, our guys and ourselves who are in there doing the work were safe and obviously the lifts are functioning properly. I don't think, at least to my knowledge on any of the inspections that have come up, for our garages that they've went in and had a mandatory recommendation, on the lifts saying that they have to be inspected. Again, it's really a best practice. And if you see it, I feel like the business owner is doing a good job of maintaining the equipment and the protection of his people and what's going on there. But I don't know of like a township ordinance or a city ordinance or anything even from our carriers that says, hey, these lifts have to be inspected. But it's definitely a best practice. And, I always followed it personally. And I know a lot of guys do that. But, to answer your question, it's not mandatory.
Hello, Paul. Steve Chestnut. Wanted to be sure the faxes came through. Let me know. Talk to you soon. Yeah, Paul. Thank you, sir. Yep. Have a great day.
All right. Any other questions or comments? That was another really great one about the pits and some of the information that you've actually seen in the field during an inspection. All right. Well, moving forward, let's look at some of the fire and burn exposures that the guys who work on these vehicles have, as well as the garage operation itself.
Okay, so In a garage setting, you're going to have a lot of burn exposures, whether that's a chemical burn from a battery acid, or if that's actually a burn from fire, whether that's welding or a torch. Pretty much every garage that you're going to walk into, they're going to have some sort of welder. It's used as a tool. A lot of times they're not doing fabrication per se, but they're going to use a welder, typically a MIG welder. We're going to show you that in a minute, as a tool to either loosen bolts or fix and repair an exhaust system or something of that nature. They're also going to have a torch. It's compressed gas and oxygen. It burns really hot. You're going to see that here in a minute. But the torch, again, it helps loosen stuck bolts. It helps cut bolts off. Sometimes they cut exhaust systems off that they can't remove. So you're going to have these things in a garage setting that is going to be a burn exposure for the guys working here. Beyond chemical, you're going to have real heat. So let's fire up the torch and let's take a look and see what they're dealing with. Now, as you can see here, he's adjusting the gas and oxygen mixture to get the right temperature for the piece of material that he's going to cut. And in this case, it's a chunk of angle iron. And as you can also see, he's wearing a fire retardant shirt, the proper eyewear to protect him from any slag that might fly as he's cutting this piece of metal. And then also some fire retardant gloves, typically welding gloves or heavy leather to protect his hands from the heat. Beyond the fire hazard to the technician that's actually doing the cutting, as you can see the slag falling on the ground, it's extremely hot, so any rags, any fluids that are flammable, any cans, as we discussed earlier, need to be stored in a proper cabinet because as you can see, the slag falls on the ground, it can catch rags on fire, it can catch something else on fire. And that torch made quick work of a pretty thick chunk of angle iron. This particular welder is on, you want to see, it's on a welding cart, so it can be transported around the shop safely. You're also going to see, as we talked about bigger tanks of compressed gas earlier for the torch, you have a smaller tank here of a mix that's used on the MIG welder, and it's also chained to the cart, again, so it doesn't fall over, and then you have an issue where the valve's broken off and there's high pressure compressed gas leaking out of the tank. So we're actually going to do a little MIG welding demonstration here. We're going to again show you the hazards with the fire, or the heat from the fire, and the slag that's going to come off and potentially not only burn the individual who's doing the welding, but also catch things on fire that are around where the gentleman's welding. So take a look. Yeah, as you can see, he's again wearing the proper welding helmet. Typically, there are auto darkening helmets to protect the eyes from the brightness of the weld. He also has the proper gloves on, and he's welding in a safe area on the ground, on the concrete where there's no fluids or oily rags that catch on fire. Because again, the slag that comes off the welder can also catch things on fire.
A little tough to show chemical burns in that particular video, but at least we were to show you, some of the other things that definitely cause burns, not only to the mechanic or the technician, but can also start a fire in a garage. But a lot of times chemical burns will come from solvents and battery acids, also fluid in the eyes. It's really great to have an eye wash station in a garage if possible, as well as hot fluids. The coolant in a radiator typically is between 170 and 210 degrees. If there's a problem, it could be hotter than that. And I've actually watched, a cap blow off of a radiator as a technician was leaning into an engine bay, and it really harmed and damaged the skin on his forearms just because of the temperature of the fluid. So it's not only just your, fire exposures that can cause burns and issues for these guys, but just to give you an idea of how hot some of the things are that we watched. So the flame from a match is typically about 1,300 degrees. The MIG welding demonstration that you saw there, when it starts to fuse metal together, it's around 3,000 degrees. The torch that the gentleman used to cut the piece of angle iron that was 3/8 inch thick steel angle iron, about 6,300 degrees. And the end-all be-all surface of the sun, it's about 10,000 degrees. So that torch is pretty darn hot, in the 6,000 degree range and up. But that kind of gives you, an idea of how hot some of these things are that they're working with, and why, not only the technician needs to be protected, but the areas around it need to be protected. As I mentioned earlier, when I've walked in the garage and I've seen fluid storage for waste oil heaters, and these guys are doing cutting and welding in those areas, you just want to be sure that they're not doing that type of operation in an area where there's solvents or flammables around. In some of these places, we even have a small area that they will do their, if you will, fabrication or welding, off of a vehicle. If they're just adding a hanger onto a piece of exhaust or something like that, they might even have a designated table that's steel where they can hook the ground up to, that again is perfectly clean, no flammables, no rags, nothing like that sitting around it. You want to make sure that if you do see, a cutting torch or a MIG welder, that at least they have the proper eye, ear, hand, face protection, as well as body. He had a particular shirt on that was also fire retardant. A lot of these companies also sell welding jackets. They're just heavy leather jackets that typically you'll see these guys, they'll hang them on the welder to make sure every time they go to use it that it's available. But if you are writing workers' comp as well, it helps cut down on the burns or issues to the guys beyond the fire hazards that can occur when they're doing these types of services. Any questions that I can answer for you, or comments you'd like to make, as you guys have already added in about, cutting torches or welding, or things you've seen when you walk into garages?
Ryan, this is Ed again.
Yes. Sorry
to have more suggestions. I'm a firefighter in addition to being an insurance agent. But I had a municipal account where I lost the entire public works garage when the guy was using the acetylene torch. Mm-hmm. And what caused it was the coil of hose that he had laid down on the ground, fairly close to where he was cutting. Yep. And the slag went into the coil and melted the hose, and the acetylene started pouring out, and it caught fire, and the rest, it took the entire garage, all the vehicles, everything. Again, a $1 million plus loss. The fire extinguisher, I did not see the guy with the fire extinguisher nearby him. I know in my case with the municipal garage, there was no fire extinguisher that was right there and handy. It was across the garage, and he couldn't get across the garage because the flames were already too large. So they must have that handy as well. So just my couple suggestions there.
Absolutely. And we should have showed it in the video right behind where the torch was, and you can kind of see it in the picture where he's cutting. There's a steel beam, and they actually have the fire extinguisher mounted right there. So that's actually where he does his welding and cutting in that area, and literally 5 feet away is an extinguisher. But that's a really great point. If we do a specific fire and burn webinar, we'll have to invite you in for all your real world experience. So we appreciate the feedback.
Sure, be glad to.
Anybody else have any questions or great comments to add to it? All right, so now we've talked about a number of different items, and let's move into flammables and where they should be stored. So let's talk about proper storage.
Okay, so what we also did as we came in the garage, we staged a few things to show you what you're typically going to see when you walk into an environment like this. Now, most flammable substances, brake parts cleaner, and you can see right on it says flammable. Any of your solvents, carburetors, not so much anymore, but you do have different fuel system cleaners, carburetor cleaners. These guys are going to have sitting around. these items need to typically be stored in a UL approved cabinet. But a lot of times when you go into a garage, you're going to see shelving, whether it's wood or homemade, and you're going to see different items like this. So you need to be aware that flammable items such as brake parts cleaner and other solvents need to be stored in a UL approved cabinet. A lot of times that does come up on the inspections, and a lot of times that is something that's in the policies or in the quotes, as you'll see when we send them over to you. So as we walked in the door and as we were looking around at the overall housekeeping of the garage, and as I had mentioned multiple times, you need to be aware and look around and see what's going on in these environments. One thing you're going to notice is the caps that go on top of a compressed gas tank, and it protects the valve in case by chance the tank falls over. It doesn't break the valve off and thousands of pounds of pressurized gas are now shooting out of the tank. But you want to look around. This is something you want to be aware of, and if you see these sitting around, you want to say, hey, where are the tanks? Where are the tanks that they go to? So let's take a walk over here, and we're going to show you where the tanks are stored. So here's an example of the tanks that I was discussing. As you can see, the one on my left hand has the protective cap on the top, which all stored tanks should have. The one on my right hand, we took the cap off for demonstration purposes. But these tanks typically need to be 20 feet away from any fire source. They need to always be stored with a chain or some sort of restraint on them against the wall or a particular storage rack made for these tanks. And you also want to keep them in a cool, dry place. You don't want them in front of sunlight or anything that'll change the pressure internally because of heat or because of fire. So you want these tanks to be safe, and you want to look around. If they don't have the caps on them, you need to ask questions why. It doesn't matter if they're filled or empty, but you want to take a look around the garage. If you see caps, you want to ask about the compressed gas, because a lot of these shops will use it not only for their torches, but also other types of welding, whether it's MIG or TIG.
Pretty self-explanatory stuff there about the solvents and the flammables. You know, as I mentioned, UL approved cabinets, that is going to be on the majority of, you know, the quotes, recommendations on these policies that are going to come over, and it does come up, you know, in the inspections after the policies are bound. In the top right-hand corner, you can see an example of one of these cabinets, and a best practice would be to have anything flammable that's on top of the cabinet out of the cabinet. These cabinets need to be mounted on the floor. They're typically made of steel construction, and if you have corrosive items that are also flammable, they need to be separated. This particular cabinet has 4 different areas to store different items like solvents or gasoline or different things like that. Also, the cabinets should be away from, you know, an exit or a doorway. Obviously, if it catches fire and you're trying to escape the building, you don't want to have to run through a, you know, cabinet that's, you know, potentially on fire as you're trying to get out of there. The compressed gas cylinders, they do make specific racks for those particular cylinders, as we looked at there, but they at minimum need to be in an area that's preferably cool and dry, away from a fire or heat source, and they need to be restrained, whether it's with a strap or a chain, to ensure that they don't fall over. Typically in an acetylene tank, the pressures will get as high as 3,000 pounds. In your oxygen tanks, you're going to see about 250 pounds of pressure. And if you want to see how dangerous they can really be, go to Google, go to YouTube, do a quick search. There's a lot of different staged, you know, videos where they're showing them breaking the valves off of these high pressure tanks, and you know they're going through walls, they're going through doors. They'll fly a couple hundred yards, and of course, if a tank falls over in an environment like we were in, obviously somebody can get killed, or even worse, you know, the building catches on fire, someone else gets injured, and it's a really bad situation for everyone involved. But you just you know, want to use common sense and look around, and the UL approved cabinet's a really big one that comes up all the time for Annie and I when you know, we're reviewing some of these submissions that you guys send in. Any other questions about what we saw here, or good comments about what you've seen in the field? All right, let's move on to our 8th video. This is tire storage.
As you see behind me and on the floor, we have tires. Pretty much every shop that you're going to go into is going to sell some tires or going to replace some tires, especially if they're a state inspection station. And what you want to pay attention to is a couple of things. You want to look at tires inside. Are they piled up neatly? And as you see on the shelf, do they have stickers on them, and why? The question you want to ask when you see nice, neat piled tires with stickers or labels, do they sell tires? Do they sell used tires? That's something that we can cover, but that's a question you might want to ask. If you see stacks of brand new tires, more than likely they're selling X amount of new tires, whether that's state inspection reasons or just folks coming in off the street to have their vehicles fixed. But you want to look at used tires that have labels or any writing on them, because that might be something we need to cover, used tire sales. Piles of tires inside, you want to see them stacked neatly or put in a specific area. Tires outside, what you want to look at is, are they neatly piled up? And you want to ask a question, how long do the tires sit there until a company comes out and collects them? Typically, it's once a month on a shop that might be doing a fair amount of tires. If it's a tire-specific shop, it might be once every week. The big issue with tires outside, twofold. Number one, it's an area for pests to get into and make homes. Number two, a lot of municipalities and townships have ordinances about tires sitting outside because they fill with water and now they become a breeding ground for mosquitoes. So you need to watch that and you need to ask questions if you see tires outside. Beyond the fact that a pile of tires outside, if for some reason someone lights it on fire, accidentally it catches on fire, it's extremely hard to put out. But pretty much every shop you're going to walk into, they're going to sell tires to some degree or another. Used tires is a big one. You want to ask questions about that. If tires are outside, you also want to take a look and ask them how long they sit here until they're picked up.
Yeah, the tires that sit outside, the majority of shops, that's where they're going to store them. They don't want, used tires taking up their shop space, which is valuable when it's there to make money for the business owner. But the big thing, again, is to find out how long are these tires outside. Typically, it's 1 month. They'll come and pick them up. Tire-specific shops might even have a designated trailer outside by some of these tire recyclers that they just load them into the trailer. But you just want to ask the question because pests and mosquitoes can get in there, which ultimately become a problem. And as I mentioned, new and used tires, we have markets that'll do both. But you want to ask the question, if you see in the picture here on the left, they have these tires neatly labeled and they're either reinstalling or selling these tires, but you don't want that to come up for your insured on an inspection if we've already bound a policy with a company that maybe has a limitation on the used tire sales or no used tire sales at all. So you don't want to be put in a spot, and neither does the insured. So make sure you ask the questions if you see them sitting around. Just find out the new versus used tire sales, and we definitely have markets that'll do it for us. Any comments, questions that you guys have had, experiences with, tires, goods and bads? All right. If we don't have any questions on the tires, let's move into, business, personal property, and contents, and we're specifically going to look at tools. I'm going to try to bring you up to speed here on what some of these tools cost that these guys have in their garage.
One of the other big things when you're coming into a garage and you're talking about business, personal property, and contents, you want to take a look and specifically discuss this with the business owner. Tools, and equipment. These boxes, especially when they say Snap-on on the lid, these boxes are hundreds of dollars and just small pieces of equipment. So you might have something like this torque wrench here. This particular tool is going to cost anywhere from $100 to $200. The digital ones go up to $300, $400, $500, like the one that's in this case here. So these little boxes, and on this table, you might have $2,000 or $3,000 worth of equipment on a table like this. And as we're going to show you here in a minute, there's tall toolboxes. Toolboxes themselves with no tools can cost $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. And then the technicians load all their equipment up. The insureds, they're going to buy these tools literally on the weekly basis as the Matco and Snap-on trucks roll in to see them every week. They typically buy new pieces of equipment. And again, a little box like this might cost you $300, $400, $500. So you want to talk with them and you might want to have them go through it literally with a pencil sometimes to figure out how much equipment they actually have, how many the tool cost. It all adds up. Small boxes are expensive, big boxes are expensive, so you want to be on point when you're doing your business, personal property, and contents coverage.
Yeah, as I mentioned there, tool prices are extremely high. again, feel free to go on Google and research some of the Snap-on equipment or Matco, and you'll get to see that, small ratchets that you might buy at Sears for $20, $30, $40, they're going to be ticketed at $150, $200, and these guys have toolboxes filled with that stuff. The boxes by themselves, some of them are as big as cars, and they cost as much as cars. They're $30,000, $35,000, and then you start to fill each tray with equipment and tools, and pretty soon that box is worth $100,000 or more. They also have trucks that come to these garages every week, and it depends. Some of the heavy, equipment guys will have a certain brand that'll come in there compared to the guys that are working on your traditional, private passenger vehicle. But almost a guarantee, 52 times a year, that contents amount is going to increase because these guys will, buy new tools and equipment. So it's just something you want to be aware of. A lot of people just don't realize how expensive some of this stuff really is. So I just wanted to show you a couple quick examples of what they cost. And as newer vehicles become more computer controlled and have a lot more, sensors and electronics, the tools for diagnosis are going to be more and more important to these guys. A simple, diagnostic tool, and again, I just keep using the company Snap-on, that's maybe as big as the original iPad. We bought them, we were buying middle of the road pieces of equipment, and they were $2,500, and they also needed updates, and they only last a couple years, and then it's on to the next. So these guys are going to be buying more and more diagnostic equipment as time moves on, and again, that's a small box. It's really expensive. So just be aware when you go into these places how much some of this equipment really costs, so that the insured can be properly covered. Anybody have any questions or comments or experiences that you've had, on some of the toolboxes that you've seen, and maybe some of the big ticket items that you've come across in the field?
Ryan, I just want to talk about the emission machines nowadays. Most of the smaller places are actually renting them because they run anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 depending on where you get it from. So you need to have that listed as as part of your business personal property, because they're going to want to be added as an additional insured and a loss payee. I've come across that many a times. So.
Yeah, and those pieces of equipment too, as you mentioned, Ann, they're pretty mobile. It looks like, sometimes a little out of date computer that might be on a specific table, with other attachments that go with it. But yeah, as Annie mentioned, it's a pretty big ticket item that you might not realize when you walk in the door. So that's a great one to ask. All right, well, if nobody has any other comments or questions, let's move on to our final slide, and that's trying to build rapport with the insured as you walk in the door.
Ryan, we do have a question here.
I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Are tools capped at certain amounts usually?
I have not seen that. Annie, have you seen that on any of these particular garages where the contents coverage? I mean, I guess it depends if it's tied into the building and, the total insured value.
No, because we're writing it as business personal property, not just tools. So whatever they have business personal property wise, I mean, even if they don't own the building, we can write it that way. Just have to remind them that if they don't have a central station alarm, there's not going to be theft coverage. So that is the biggest point in this, because somebody's going to steal them. That's the best, that's more of the coverage that they're looking for, is the theft. But no, there's no cap on it. I've written them where they have $500,000 worth of business personal property. So anything else you want to add, Ryan?
No, I think that's really good information from experience. All right.
So as you walk into any of these garages, what you're trying to do, again, is build rapport. You want to build a relationship with the folks that own the business and the people that work there. So if you walk in and in the back of a garage, under a sheet, under a pile of dust, you see something like this classic Ford, and your grandmother had one, or your mom, or someone in your family, or your dad, start a conversation about it. That usually helps break the ice with a lot of garage owners, especially as you get out away from the city. It helps build some rapport, and that's a good place to start before you begin going through their garage to tell them what they do and don't need on the insurance side. So look around, you see old cars, if you see pictures, if you see things you can relate to, use that to help build rapport with the business owner before you start getting into the insurance side of things.
Yeah, this for me was really great when I would walk into a garage. Obviously, being involved in motorsports and a passion and love for cars, it was a pretty easy deal. I could see a simple picture on a wall, or a cylinder head from a big block Chevy, and that's how I got started as I walked in the door. And I will tell you this, as a previous business owner, if someone can come in and talk the language just a little bit, that went a long way. Also, the dress, that's something that you might want to be aware of, especially, as I keep saying, as you move away from the city, as you get into more the mom and pop type individual garages. If I saw a guy or a girl who came in that had, a full suit on, tie, all the works, my immediate reaction was, what are you trying to sell me, and what do you really know about my business? I was much more open to a guy that walked in, that had casual dress, and as he walked in the door, he noticed something in the parking lot, and we had a little discussion ahead of time. Now I'm curious why he's here instead of, can you please leave? But that's just, something from my experience, both on the business owner side and also on the retail side, as I walked into a lot of these garages unannounced, that you can do. Look at pictures. If you see something in the parking lot, if you notice something in the garage, if there's a magazine there, if there's something that you can do to relate, that's a great way to do it with garage owners. And as most of you are doing anyways, as you're, doing cold calling or walking into prospective business, whether it's, a restaurant or a garage, you're kind of doing the same thing. But garage owners in particular are not too happy when folks walk in and they want to sell them something, if you will, unless, again, it's a Snap-on or a Matco truck, and then they go running. But do you guys have any, good stories to share to all the folks who are still on here about your experience or building rapport with, a new client base or your prospects? Well, if anyone does have any good stories or questions, feel free to email them over to us. What I'd like to do now is turn it back over to Nicole. I'd like to thank you all for joining our second garage webinar. Hopefully you learned something here, but we're going to turn it back over to Nicole, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what's next.
Thanks. Great job, Ryan, and thank you for participating, folks. Everyone was very, very helpful with their thoughts on these things too. We do have the last webinar coming up for garages, types of coverages needed for garage owners. Ryan and Annie are going to be helping with that on April 30th. We hope that you can join us for that as well. And then if we flip over to the next slide, you guys can also see webinars that we've got coming up for different topics as well. And as I said, a copy of this recorded webinar and the PowerPoint presentation is going to be emailed to all of you as well. So hopefully you can join us again. I think we're going over to the last slide with Ryan.
Hello there. Well, we must be done with our second garage webinar. I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you're able to take something that you learned today out into the field to allow you to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, and prospect yourself some new garage business. From all of us here at the Toscano Agency, I want to thank you for joining us for our second garage webinar. And remember, get out in the field, get your hands dirty, and get into the garage.
All right, we're going to open up for questions and answers now. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Ryan or Annie while you've got them on the line?
Hey guys, it's Ed again. Sorry, but a lot of my risks have some serious towing risks associated with them. They're not necessarily tow truck operators that sit on the side of the roads and waiting for the next call. but they are hauling for their customers mainly. But their customers in many cases could be police departments, which are, the police call them when there's an accident and have them come tow the vehicles away from the accident scenes. I find the towing risks to be somewhat of a challenge to find markets for them. And most of them have body shops that are associated with them. Any suggestions, any, markets that you're looking at that are going to be contenders on something like this?
I'll definitely see if Annie wanted to chime in. I know she's probably got a lot of great experience with this. I mean, we definitely do have opportunities. Anne, do you have anything very specific or any of our markets that you would say are one better than the other for that particular instance?
Not in this, no, not really, but most of our, they're really, our garage markets don't want any type of for-hire towing. So this police, the accident, are they towing it back to their garage, and are they just holding it, or are they going to repair it? So yeah, it's not for hire, but technically it is, so they don't have any filings. When you start to get into filings, that's when it has to be split up from garage to auto. So it all depends on the risk itself.
Yeah.
It's a case by case basis is what happens to it. So
yeah, in most
a lot of times
those,
we can't write them. So
yeah, I was going to say in most of those cases, they're towing it to their yard, to their shop, and they may get the job to fix it, but again, they may not. Depends on the customer who owns the vehicle. But the towing side of it is definitely a challenge. And if I would recommend that you keep your eyes and ears open for a market that is not adverse to towing operations that have body shops, or body shops that have towing operations, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. The next one you come across, give us a call, myself or Ryan. We can talk it through. Like I said, it's on a case by case basis, so we just have to go from there.
Okay. Well, thank you, and hey, great job today.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Nicole, did you have anything else to add in particular?
Nope, I don't have anything else to add. I think that, oh, nope, we just had another question come in. Hold on one second.
Yep.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure about this question. Let me respond back, and we'll get back to them on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
yeah,
go ahead, Ryan. I think you're good.
We're available. Well, if there's nothing else to add, again, we'd like to thank you all for joining us for our second garage webinar here. Hope you're all going to sign up for garage webinar number 3, where we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the coverages and some of the specifics on these policies and how it applies to the things we've learned in the first and second webinar to this point. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at the third garage webinar.
Bye.